The problem is that the child on the receiving end of that diagnosis then feels like they need to be fixed, and they might feel bad or they might feel broken.
The landscape is slowly changing for neurodivergent kids, but progress is slow and we're facing headwinds. Getting a diagnosis is still a step toward receiving educational services and insurance benefits, but there are downsides that can work to impede progress. Straight ahead, Debbie Steinberg Kuntz is here to talk about those subjects, as well as parent advocacy, emotional regulation, and the free Bright and Quirky Summit, April 4th through 8th. That's all straight ahead on episode 118. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you are going to get a lot out of the Bright and Quirky Summit. You can hear encore presentations from some of your favorite past guests from this podcast, Dr. Mona Delahook, Amanda Morin, and Dr. Dan Peters, just to name a few. Our guest today is Debbie, and during the summit, she turns the tables and interviews me. You can hear us talk shop about our experiences providing mental health counseling services to bright neurodivergent kids on day 3 of the summit. Around 5 recordings are released each day of the summit, and you can watch them all for free while the summit is live. But if you're like me and you want to have permanent access to all of the materials, there's an option for that too. You can click the link in the show notes or go to our website, neurodiversitypodcast.com, for the link to sign up. The summit begins on April 4th. Our conversation with Debbie Steinberg Kuntz is coming up.
Identifying, supporting, and challenging gifted and twice exceptional students is often difficult for school districts. But Emily Kircher-Morris's new book, Teaching Twice Exceptional Learners in Today's Classroom, provides guidelines and a unique approach for identifying and understanding 2E students. It includes strategies that will help educators and administrators provide strength-based instruction, motivate twice exceptional learners, and even help them with self-regulation. It contains important information to help educators advocate for 2E students, including things you need to know about individualized education plans and the Section 504 plan process. This important new book is now available. Go to neurodiversitypodcast.com for links to get your copy. Teaching Twice Exceptional Learners in Today's Classroom from Free Spirit Publishing.
You're listening to
The Neurodiversity
Podcast.
I am excited to talk to Debbie Steinberg Kuntz. Debbie is the founder and host of the Bright and Quirky Summit, which I'm excited to be a part of this year. And Debbie and I both come from a counseling background and have specialized in working with neurodivergent youth and adults. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. So Debbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Emily. I'm so happy to be here.
So before you launched the Bright and Quirky Summit, you worked as a therapist specializing in twice exceptional youth. So how did you get to that point where that's what your specialization ended up being?
Yeah, it's funny. So I graduated grad school thinking, I really need to specialize in something. And I remember a mentor of mine said, you really don't have to pick a specialty, just carve out what you don't want to do. So over the years, I said, I don't want to do eating disorders. I don't want to do sexual abuse. And I was carving things out. And at the same time, had my own kids who are now almost 20 and 16, found out they're both bright and quirky or neurodivergent, started researching all kinds of things for them, because even being in the field, there was so little information. And then gradually, as I was researching things for my own kids, I started to attract people in the Seattle area who were also raising neurodivergent kids. So it was sort of a natural thing from my own home life. And then that became sort of my purpose on earth.
Yeah. What do you notice that has changed? How's the landscape changed as far as our awareness and understanding of what neurodivergent kids need since the time that you began?
Well, I'm kind of living in this weird bubble where I interview a lot of people just like you do. So I have amassed a lot of information, but I talk to families every day around the world who are in schools and in neighborhoods where they have never heard the word neurodivergent or twice exceptional. That's why I like to go with the words bright and quirky. So sadly, I think a lot has not changed. But for those of us who are soaking up the knowledge and sharing it with families, I think one major shift that neuroscience has given us, and the example of people, neurodivergent people who are really thriving, is that, our medical model is set up in a certain way that you go to a counselor like us or a psychologist or a doctor and you say, I'm seeing these signs in my kiddo. And then the way our medical model works is then we would see, okay, do you meet criteria for a diagnosis? Because as you know, there's a list of symptoms. And if you meet it, then there's this list of things to fix and treatment options to do that. And, getting a diagnosis is super important because it gives us a common language, can open services up, help insurance to pay for it. But the problem is that the child on the receiving end of that diagnosis then feels like they need to be fixed and they might feel bad or they might feel broken. So what I've really uncovered, and I think you have too from our past conversations, is that we need to blow on the embers of their strengths. When I talk to successful neurodivergent adults, they have followed their passions and interests, and that puts wind in their sails so they can get better and better at the things that they're interested in. And then when you can find that intersection of what you're interested in and what you're good at, then you are totally off to the races. So I think breaking out of this remediation only focus has been life-changing for so many of the families that I work with.
You mentioned that intersection of where the strengths and the passion and all of that just kind of comes together. And what I notice so much when I'm working with kids is I feel like I'm telling them, just hang on. We just got to get through high school. If you can get to college or get to whatever, and you can study what you really want to study, it's all going to come together. And I feel like sometimes for them to hear that, it's like, oh, it's not going to change anytime in the near future. As adults, we can kind of look and see where those things have happened. Do you see that when kids kind of trying to deal with fitting into this box of school that often just doesn't fit for them?
I do. Traditional schools are not made for kids like ours. Ours are not the cookie cutter kids. And that's a beautiful thing about them, that they bring such unique ideas to the table. I really think a lot of the kids we work with are going to express their strengths outside of school. Mm-hmm. It is so important for us to be opportunity makers, for us to get them into just exposed to different sports, to robotics, to math club, to Dungeons and Dragons, or anything where they can join a group or a tribe and feel some belonging. Mentors are also so important for families like ours, where you could bring in a neighbor or a high school student down the street. This can be really informal, or even hire a teacher after school who can just geek out with your child about their interests. So we really don't want to put the gift on hold. But yes, we have to strategize very carefully. And so many families in the bright and quirky community, they want their kids to be in all AP classes in high school, to have a lot of rigor. And I say, you know what? Let's do the rigor in what they're really interested and good at, and sort of triage the other things that they need to get through. And some people will explore some really unique solutions that a lot of people don't know about, like partial homeschooling, or partial one-to-one classes for the things that are harder, or tutors. There are a lot of really interesting ways to get through school that a lot of people don't know about or don't think about.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of parents of neurodivergent kids end up trying to find the pieces that might work, or they explore just totally different options. I have a client who, because of the pandemic, had always really struggled with in-person school. Well, the pandemic pushed them into doing some virtual school for that, end of 2020. And ultimately, they remained virtual the following year. In our area, kids kind of had an option. They could either go back in person or stay virtual. But ultimately, he ended up staying there and actually graduated early. but it ended up really working for him. And I think the family was very nervous about taking that leap because it was just so different and they didn't know what to expect. What advice do you give to parents who maybe have an idea of something different that they might try, but they're hesitant?
I would say it's really an act of courage. And I work with a lot of families that are feeling the exact same way. And I would really suggest that you put yourself in a community with other parents like you who can help give you confidence that it is okay to swim upstream when the mainstream around you is swimming in a different direction. Different kids need different things. And when I see bright and quirky neurodivergent people thriving, they carve out a good fit life for themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's what we really need to do as parents, whether it's school or enrichment activities or friendships. We're looking for the good fit. So, traditionally we'll say, oh, that neighborhood has good schools. But what does that really mean? That means that they have certain test scores on standardized tests or AP, or send a certain amount of kids to certain colleges. But a good school for our kids is about goodness at fit. Do they have project-based learning? Do they have teachers who understand neurodiversity? Do they have the ability for kids to test out of certain subjects or do curriculum compacting or do mentorship or partial homeschooling or full homeschooling? I really want to empower parents to have the courage to experiment and try different things. And if your child is showing any signs of mental health challenges, we always want to prioritize mental health over education. And some kids need to take a break. They need a gap year, gap semester, gap quarter, and they might only be in 6th grade. And that's okay because nothing is more important than mental health.
What does that end up looking like? How do families implement that if they do notice that their kid just really needs that time? Do you find that schools will work with parents in that way, or do they end up just kind of pulling them out and homeschooling for a short amount of time, or what?
I have seen so many different combinations, and I think it really comes down to the schools and the teachers. And, in the United States, we have 504 and IEP plans. These are individualized education plans. Other countries do it differently. So we can have one thing in the legal document, which are, the accommodations a child can get. But what I've found is having the most success is having individual conversations with teachers to say, hey, my child's mental health is really tanking, and we need to sort of call in the cavalry and see what we can do. And I've been pretty amazed. Teachers will give extended time, especially during COVID. Their own lives are really stressful right now. So I think communication with teachers is absolutely paramount. If that doesn't work or it continues, first of all, I would absolutely get local help, local counseling. Figuring out the school situation is one slice of the pie, and the other slice is doing some skill building in local counseling. But some parents, they will pull their kids from school either for a short time, or they'll decide to deschool, unschool, homeschool. And let me just unpack that for a minute. When kids get in the red zone where they're in fight or flight, they, as you know, Emily, they're not available to learn. So what we want to do, if we can't get back to the green zone to calm and ready to learn in school, some parents do take them out and just have a week, 2 weeks, even a month of decompressed time where it's interest-based learning, project-based learning, according to what is they're interested in. And sometimes really, if it's a severe depression, we might just take a pause on school and work on the mental health. So it can look a lot of different ways.
It can be scary for parents to have to make some of those decisions because it doesn't fit the paradigm of how they were raised or what they've seen other people doing, which kind of brings me to my next question, which you mentioned, the importance of parents finding a community.
Yes.
Talk about why that's so important.
I can talk about what I have seen. So when I was in private practice, I had groups in the evening for parents of 2E kids. And there's really nothing like coming together with, 8 or 10 other parents and hearing the stories And it's so validating to feel like you're not alone, to get ideas from each other, and then the collective wisdom that bubbles up. We have so many great interviews like you do with fabulous experts, but really when you hear from another parent who's in the trenches on the front line, there's no substitute for that because they've done their own trial and error, trial and insight. And now at Bright and Quirky, we have our Idea Lab, which people can get into through the summit with our gold package. And we have really figured out over time I call it the 7 steps of thriving, the different pieces that need to be in place to have a really solid plan or roadmap for these kids. And it's a combination of content, community, and coaching. And that community, whether you're in our program, your office, or wherever you are, community is just so important for that validation and belonging. And just to say, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. There are lots of other people like me.
Yeah, just normalizing that experience and destigmatizing what it means to be bright and quirky. There is so much stigma surrounding all of those diagnoses. And you're right. It's like we can kind of talk around it a little bit in different ways.
And I just want to say, Emily, I didn't mean to plug our group. I mean, it really, really helps families, but really it's wherever people can find the belonging.
Oh, absolutely. Hearing from other people. And I think also for people who have struggled, and maybe now they're kind of growing past that, the opportunity to connect with other parents and share their experiences and give back can be really valuable as well.
That is so huge because, I remember being the mom of a second grader, and I'm in the field, not really knowing, how to pursue this because, when you read books and listen to talks, they're very diagnosis specific, like ADHD, autism, anxiety. Mm-hmm. But, I deal with twice exceptionality, bright and quirky, the advanced abilities and the lagging abilities at the same time, which is really complex. So yeah, to be in the same tribe or group with other people, there's just no substitute. And when you get to a place where you can mentor others and you're on the other side of that knowledge gap, it's really rewarding.
You mentioned that a lot of the diagnoses that kind of go into twice exceptionality, when you talk about twice exceptional, you're talking about a broader scope. What are some of the commonalities that you see between gifted, ADHD, autism, twice exceptional? Like, are there some things that kind of are consistent that a lot of people are dealing with?
That's such a good question because when I started Bright and Quirky and I was interviewing all these people, I was wondering that very question. I'm like, I wonder if there are things in common that could unify our approach to all of these things. And I put them in those 7 steps to thriving. So I could go through them really quick in a nutshell, if you like.
Sure.
So first of all, no matter what diagnosis we're talking about, I think we need a paradigm shift. We need a shift from my child has these things that need to be fixed to my child has unlimited potential and they have specific gifts that if we nurture them, the sky's the limit. Mm-hmm. And if we find the good fit school, we find the good fit classroom, the good fit friends, the good fit hobbies, they can shine. Every child's good at something. They just need a little help finding it sometimes. So we got to make that paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So next, I'm sure you find this, that no matter what the diagnosis, when families come in and dedicate themselves to a course of counseling, usually the barn is burning. Usually things are pretty much in crisis. So job number 1 is to de-escalate the family. So finding that self-regulation, not only for the kids, but also the parents, because parents are coming in burnt out, frustrated, scared. What's going to happen to my child? Are they going to be okay? So no matter what diagnosis we have, we really need to take a breath and do things to regulate and to take the fear out. So that's really important. Then we really need to identify what those strengths and burgeoning interests are, no matter what diagnosis we have. We need to know, what are we going to nurture? Or if this child doesn't yet know what they're interested in, let's expose them to lots of things. Musical instruments, fencing, team sports, cooking, chess, coding, who knows? what's going to spark them. So that's a really important part. Then we also want to identify their challenges. A lot of parents of neurodivergent kids will go and get a neuropsych assessment, or they'll do some educational assessments at school. Doing a private neuropsych is expensive, but I have found it absolutely invaluable because it will tell you not only the child's challenges, but also their strengths. It opens up the opportunity to get a specialized education plan so we can make their education a little bit more of that good fit. And I really help parents identify the individual challenges and prioritize them, because a lot of our neurodivergent kids will have multiple diagnoses. And that means getting if your child has 3 diagnoses, that means getting 3 treatment plans. And oh my gosh, where do we begin? So we really need to focus on one thing at a time and really rank them in order of how much is this challenge getting in the way of this child's life.
Mm-hmm.
After we have that foundation, then we can take a deep dive more into the ADHD or the autism or the anxiety, and just say the beauty of the neurodivergent mind is that it is different and it is unique. But if there are lagging skills, let's put some supports in place to help the child. Then we need to do, and I'm just running through these super quick, but next is to do some advocacy at school. As you know, so many of the teachers teaching our kids, they could be the most incredible people, but they don't have training in kids like ours for the most part. So we really equip parents with some tools like a self-advocacy toolkit to educate the educators of their kids. We're in this conundrum where we're looking to people to do things. I mean, you could probably speak to this, but we're looking to people to help us with our kids when they themselves haven't received the training. So it's a real conundrum.
Right.
And then once we've taken those steps, they learn the Bright and Quirky method, which I think is similar to your method because we've spoken in the past, which is about being a self-scientist and creating a lifestyle where you run experiments, like using the scientific method, trying different things, and creating your own toolbox, whether it's for making friends or doing that emotional regulation or building executive function, like getting homework done. And you do more of what works and less of what doesn't work as you get that trial and insight, as you experiment. So there really, really, really is a roadmap, no matter what the flavor of neurodiversity. So that's exciting. That's really exciting.
When we talk about those different diagnoses at the office, I feel like sometimes it's helpful for me as a clinician because I can then kind of develop some strategies or maybe understand what's behind some of the difficulties or how we can use the strengths to support those. But in general, understanding that some of those key pieces between helping kids just learn the general skills so that they can figure out what works for them individually is what's the most useful for all of the kids. And when you're someone who learns and thinks differently, that is something that, unfortunately, there is a lot of self-discovery that goes along with that.
I really like how Nicole Tatro puts it, that every brain is as unique as a fingerprint. So we don't really even have to think in terms of strengths and weaknesses, although we all have strengths and weaknesses. What if we started to look at our kids' brains as uniquely as fingerprints? Then we have to do a lot of detective work to know what the good fit life would look like. And it becomes a lifestyle for life because that strategy of self-discovery never ends. And that's a beautiful thing.
Tell us a little bit more specifically, you've kind of mentioned it, but tell us about the Bright and Quirky Summit. What can people expect if they join up?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the summit is totally free. It runs for 5 days. We've got 4 to 5 talks a day, and each talk runs for 24 hours for free from when it airs. And really, we've got an incredible lineup. You're in it, and I think we had a fun conversation.
We did.
We've got Michelle Borba, Ned Hollowell, Mona Delahook, Chris Willard, Renee Jane, Jeffrey Blount, Nicole Tatro, Ned Johnson, Susan Baum, Barry Perzant. So many great, great speakers. A number of, actually autistic experts, actually with ADHD experts. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
So they sign up and then they can just watch all of these talks and kind of learn and dig in from all these amazing experts.
Yeah. And the comments that we get are, most people don't live near these experts. They haven't been exposed to this sort of information, or they've read their books that are geared for the general public. And, I'm asking them questions specifically about bright and quirky kids. So it's really honed in to our neurodivergent population. So the information is really, geared for kids like ours. So I think it's a valuable use of time and it's totally free.
Okay, well, before we wrap up our conversation, I want to ask, if you were talking directly to one of the parents who's trying to navigate the life of raising a bright and quirky child, what's the one thing that you would really want them to hear?
I would say, I know it's really hard. And I know you may not have the answers yet that you're looking for. But the answers are out there. And come to the summit because you'll learn a lot of the answers there. And I think Emily will give you a link so you have those in the show notes. And help is here. Help is out there. So please don't dismay. And once you do learn a lot of the little nuggets that will be helpful, your child will thrive. We have a really interesting correlation that we do this little thing with what we call super fans, where the people that have been logging in a lot and using a lot of the information, they get a 30-minute consult with me. And then what I find is most of them are doing really well. So over time, I've learned that the more time people put into learning, the more their child thrives, which is common sense. But really, I have seen scientifically a correlation. So don't despair. Go to a place that has a lot of the information, a lot of the people, and steep yourself in a learning community because the answers are there and they will really help you.
So like we said, if you would like to join in on the summit, check the show notes. There's a link there. And Debbie, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Emily. It was fun.
Parenting is hard, and parenting neurodivergent kids is next level parenting. Luckily, the landscape of support for parents of neurodivergent kids is becoming more accessible through podcasts like this one and Debbie's Summit, which starts next week. I'm so glad that you're here with us for this journey, and I can't wait to see what accomplishments our bright and quirky kids have in store. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Thanks to Debbie Steinberg Kuntz for being here. Remember, to register for the Bright and Quirky Summit, go to neurodiversitypodcast.com and use the link on the front page. Thanks to Joby, Claude Signet, August Wilhelmsen, and Bill Ferngren for making the music that graces our little corner of the world. Among our new Patreon patrons this week are Ronnie, Amy, Amanda, Natalie, Adam, and Lauren. Guys, the help you're giving us is really appreciated, and every little bit helps. If you would like to join them and help us out with a small monthly donation, go to patreon.com/neurodiversity. Emily Kircher-Morris is our host. I'm Dave Morris, the executive producer and post-production editor. We're grateful for your listenership, and please tell a friend. See you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.